Welcome to the Made for More Parenting Podcast, a production of Emmanuel Schools and Summit Ministries. I'm Roger Erdvig, and I appreciate you joining us for today's episodes, Raising Sturdy Kids. And I know you're going to love this one. Our guest for this month is Christian therapist and popular speaker, Keith McCurdy. Keith works with parents and children all over the country, and his focus is on raising kids to be mature and emotionally strong. This fits in so well with a biblical worldview, and it's refreshing to hear from a mental health professional who seeks to align his work with scriptural truths about what we should aim for in life, what's most important for our kids, and how to raise kids that flourish in this crazy world we live in. Well, let's get right into the interview. So great to have you on the Made for More podcast, Keith, and just looking forward to talking about raising sturdy kids.
Well, thank you for having me.
So this whole concept of sturdy kids, I think it is so critically important for today's Christian school parents to understand what the goal for parenting ought to be from a biblical worldview perspective. So talk to us a little bit about this concept of sturdy kids.
Yeah, I mean, it's if you think about what the end product will be, what would you rather have? A child that's ill-equipped later or uncomfortable now? You know, I share that with parents, and they usually say, "Is there a third option?"
Yeah, right.
And I say, "No, not really." And so I'll frame it with a great quote from Thomas Paine. He says, "I love the man that can smile in trouble, that can gather strength from distress, and grow brave by reflection." You know, to me, what a wonderful kind of poetic view of a sturdy young man is. And so I think of folks that as they grow, they're not afraid of challenge. Their first emotional experience when faced with something hard is not fear or the desire to avoid. And they have a sense of God made me capable. And I may not be able to figure everything out, but I'm pretty capable. And if I can't figure it out, I know I have other capable people around me I can tap into rather than I'm looking for the quick exit. And really also a child or a young adult that's not driven so much by how they feel. They don't always see discomfort as a bad thing. So to me, those are some ways of looking at a sturdy kid. And when I talk to parents, when I think about what they want, so many times they say, "I want a happy and successful child." And I say, okay. I say, well, or would you rather have a child that's capable and of good character? And they really sit back and they think, are those different paths?
Yeah.
And I say, yeah, they really are. You know, I'll give you a great example with schools. If you go back to, say, the 1950s, think about student-teacher ratios. They were about 1 in 30 in a classroom. You know, if you want to create sheer panic in the minds of a kindergarten teacher today, say, hey, you're going to have 30 kids in your classroom.
Oh, I know that.
and today it's about 1 in 14 national average. And it's interesting. You go back to the 50s or 40s, you Google online, look at graduating elementary classes, like a third grade class or something from New York City or Chicago, you're going to see one teacher and 100 kids.
Yeah.
And they all stood still for the picture. It's unbelievable. And because the difference is this, it used to be the way we looked at our children getting ready for school. You know, we hear about kindergarten readiness and things like that all the time. It used to be the way we got them ready is that they knew when they walked in the classroom, their job was to respect the authority of whoever their parent said was now in charge. So children would come to school 50 years ago, 70 years ago, and often they didn't go to kindergarten. They started in first grade, and they were, in essence, dumb as dirt academically. But they knew their job was to listen, obey, sit still when told to sit still, be quiet when told to be quiet. They had already developed a degree of self-regulation. Now, today, it's very different. Today, most parents are thinking about school and thinking about, you know, kindergarten readiness. I just hear that all the time. And they think, oh, my child has to have some academic chops. They need to already have their alphabet, know some basic math. And so we have all these kids that come in. They've had leap pads in their hands since they were born. And, you know, they've been, you know, building these little academic realms of success, but they can't sit still, can't pay attention, and have no idea of what it means to respect authority.
Hi everyone, this is Esteban inviting you to our upcoming parenting conference. First Baptist Kingsburg, The Well Kingsburg, and Kingsburg Community Church are partnering together to offer a parenting conference on Saturday, March 29th. Matt Markins, the president and CEO of Awana, will be sharing insights to how culture is forming kids, what discipleship is, and what has been shown to be effective in helping the next generation have a faith that lasts. The conference will be held at Kingsburg First Baptist Church on March 29th from 9 a.m. to 4:30. There will be worship, prayer, breakout groups, and main sessions. Lunch and snacks will be provided with registration, and there will be childcare for kids nursery through 8th grade. Register today at 1bk.church, and we'll see you there.
But they can't sit still, can't pay attention, and have no idea of what it means to respect authority. And that's what we want to change. And when you look at where that comes from, it really begins in the home. It begins with, what are parents doing to prepare these children earlier in life to engage the real world?
Well, it's so interesting that you draw, it's kind of a contrast. Hey, do you want your kids 10, 15 years from now to be sturdy, well-adjusted, able to regulate their emotions, and capable? Or do you want them to be happy and, the other words used? I do think parents today they want it all.
Yeah, they do.
And I do too. I mean, I got 5 kids. We're all out of the house now, but I want that all for them. But it sounds like what you're saying, if we focus on the happiness side, we lose everything else. Whereas if we focus on the capable, well-adjusted, regulating the emotions, you get the happiness thrown in. So I'm just curious, how did we get here? How did we get with this focus on parenting towards happiness and fulfillment as opposed to parenting towards capable, well-adjusted, meaningful lives?
Yeah, that's a great question. This is where I get to pick on my profession.
Okay,
Go
ahead.
Prior to early 1900s, we have always wrestled with the idea of, why do we do what we do? Why do we think the way we think? Philosophers, theologians for generations have wrestled with the idea of, there's something transcendent, some truth out there that we're trying to wrestle with and figure out how we relate to it. But right around 1900, Sigmund Freud came on the scene. Now, Freud was not the first at all to postulate about why we do what we do, why we think the way we think. But Freud was by far the best communicator and most intelligent to be able to speak about the idea of, we can do something with this. We can do something in the form of therapy or a therapeutic intervention. And that really launched so much of where we are today. Now, professionals in my realm, I can go to conferences all the time and folks are like, oh, we laugh about Freud and we know none of his theories really stand up to any research and a lot of interesting things to think about, but none of it really holds water. But we have fully accepted and never pushed off the mindset he began that others have played into, the therapeutic mindset. And a few pieces of that. Freud, in essence, said that if you had a problem, it came from your childhood. He was very much a determinist in that. In other words, your parents create your child. And we're not accepting the simple reality that our children are broken in need of training. And part of brokenness is a myriad of emotional experiences. Part of brokenness is a myriad of behaviors. I mean, all little children are also little criminals. Yeah. We know that with their behavior. If you've ever had children, you're sitting there thinking, yep, mine was a criminal. I've gone through multiple criminal stages. But according to Freud really got us thinking that anything we see problematic with a child is our fault. And then the other huge thing Freud did was this idea that the only way to fix your problems was to go back inside yourself to find your truth. And Freud severed this idea that truth is transcendent, and he said it's now all subjective. And the most real part of subjective truth that we all experience is our feelings. They're so rich, they're so powerful that we have started to view them through the lens of being true. And now, after Freud, however, we had a reaction. It was the behaviorists, Skinner and Pavlov. And of course, they started writing all the parenting books, all the gimmicks, all of the promises that we can change the outcome of behavior. The only problem is that it was a lie. The research that they did was only repeatable and reliable when done on animals. Not on individuals with free will. Now, behaviorism can be useful. We can nudge small things in a small direction for a small amount of time, habit management, things like that. A lot of our elementary classroom behavior management strategies are based on behaviorism, and that's fine. We're only nudging something for a small amount of time. But the notion that we can actually control outcome with a child based on behavioral principles has continued to fail generation after generation after generation. But they wrote so many books, and parents would apply all these strategies and they would ultimately fail. And when they failed, the behaviorists, instead of writing the book that said, oh my gosh, we're so sorry, this really doesn't work that consistently on humans, instead they blamed the parents and said, you weren't consistent.
Wow.
But in response to the behaviorists, we had really the current major force of humanism that's driving the mindsets of so many parents today. I mean, the behaviorists and the humanists battle back and forth. I see it in my office. I have parents that come in and say, we want to tell us something we can do to start a behavior we want to see and stop a behavior we don't like. They're thinking behaviorally. Or humanistically, they come in saying, I just want Johnny to be happy.
Mm-hmm.
Because what the humanistic movement is, it will recognize it with the idea of self-esteem. Everybody gets a trophy. And we started this simple idea that if we tell a child 400 times before breakfast how special they are, that they're going to become special just from overwhelming them with this. But we have 30 plus years of great research on that. And interesting things we see. Number one, when we overinflate self-esteem, we actually lower regard for others.
Well,
And that's a huge miss.
That's huge.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, in your experience, are you saying that looks like the parent, like you said, that 400 times before breakfast is just sending affirming messages? Now, what's wrong with affirming messages?
Yeah.
And I'm sure our parents of younger children are thinking that. So how does this play out real practically in someone's home that's kind of falling into that humanist trap? What does that really look like?
Well, it looks like a couple of things. Number one, the constant affirmation actually increases the likelihood of anxiety and depression in your child because you distort their understanding of themselves because they begin believing they're the best thing since sliced bread when in reality they're broken yet loved.
Yeah.
Those are two very different things. But you also distort their idea of the future they will inherit. And so you're setting them up with a playbook that actually doesn't work in the real broken world.
But that's being demonstrated to us everywhere. It's
everywhere.
It's this idea of only affirmation. And then maybe behind closed doors, you criticize. I'm struck by that so much in our culture, this idea of just praising everyone. And I imagine that creates this false sense that I'm okay.
Yeah. Well, it's a false sense of without me actually learning to handle the rigors of a normal life, without learning to struggle, and that letting me know that I'm capable, built by God to be capable and function in this world. Instead, I'm okay because everybody tells me I'm okay.
Right.
And it actually sets them up with no tools. And then we've seen what that leads to. That leads to safe spaces. That leads to ideas of microaggressions and trigger warnings and things like that. Because we have folks that have really bought into the idea. Ultimately, this is the second thing it does, that our feelings, really the lie of the last two generations, our feelings are the most important part of who we are.
Yeah.
And that's the pinnacle accomplishment of this humanistic movement, is we've lifted the idea of our emotions, our feelings being both the barometer for us to measure how we're doing, and our compass to direct us.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of people will come in my office and they'll say, okay, but wait a minute. We're told all of this affirming stuff. We're told it's all about feelings. Are you sure? And I said, well, okay, let me give you an example. Let me walk you through a scenario and let's see what it tells us about feelings. And so the analogy I give them is this. I say, imagine you go to New York City and, it's nighttime. You're looking for your car. You kind of get lost. You're in South Bronx and you decide you've got to walk through an alley to get to another street. So here you are walking through a dark alley in South Bronx in the middle of the night and a bunch of guys run in after you. How would you feel?
I'd be a little concerned.
Yeah,
I'd be afraid.
I'd be scared. Yeah. Now, second scenario. Imagine you're in your own home, own bed, and you dream that same scenario. How would you feel in the dream?
I'd be scared to death.
Same way. A lot of us have woken up in a fright.
Yeah.
Third scenario. You go to a movie. It's a scary movie, and something on the screen jumps, and oh man, it gets you. Whew. It doesn't last long, but in that split second, you feel scared. So think about those three scenarios. In the first scenario, when you're really in that dark alley in South Bronx and these guys are running in after you, are you in danger?
Yes.
Guess what? The other two scenarios in the dream or the movie theater, you're not in danger. What does that tell us? It tells us our feelings cannot tell the difference between fantasy and reality. Feelings do not discern truth. So we, in essence, for at least two generations, have been telling our parents to equip our children, and really themselves as they evaluate the outcome of their parenting, is my child happy, a broken compass. And my son's an Eagle Scout. I used to teach orienteering, and one of the things we learned is the further you follow a broken compass, the more lost you get. Just a real simple thing.
Yeah, that's great. And you say that, and this is consistent with the research we've done for worldview formation, that struggle is so critical. You say it is for, reordering the emotional world and becoming emotionally healthy. We would say struggle is the prompt for worldview formation when you respond to it appropriately. But yet I feel like in general, and there are lots of exceptions, in general, parents are trying to just prevent any struggle for their kids. Like that's their whole mindset. I think you say it, the snowplow parent. I just got to blow away all trials. So talk to us a little bit about this idea of struggle and how important that is and how we as parents can cooperate with that process.
Well, so I think we first got to back up what comes right before struggle and think about this. What's the goal? What's our goal? What do we want to see as the end product? And so I tell parents all the time, I say, I would challenge you that the goal is maturity. Well, that sounds simple enough. What's maturity? Well, let me break maturity into a couple categories. Biblical maturity, practical maturity, they line up. It's amazing how scriptural truth lines up with the real world when we pay enough attention. Maturity is simply this. The first branch of maturity is knowing what is right. Knowing what's true, what is good, what is right, what is common sense, what is good judgment. Knowing truth. Second part of maturity is an emotional awareness of two things. Number one, our emotions are extremely valuable. Two things I think we've all experienced consistent with Scripture. God has built us to be emotionally stimulated by His creation, the physical world of His creation. I remember the first time I went to the Grand Canyon, standing on the south rim of the Grand Canyon, just thinking, this is awesome. Or a new snowfall. I get excited about it. Some people freak out about that. But
I love that.
A beautiful sunrise, a beautiful sunset. So we are built. God built us to interact with His creation with our emotions. The second thing that we see is emotions help us stitch together relationships. They give us depth and meaning. When we walk through something with a person that's both joyous or painful, there's the opportunity to be stitched together through that experience. So we know emotions are extremely valuable. That's part one of emotional awareness. The second is the example we just talked about. Emotions are, however, unreliable. So we have knowing truth, emotional awareness, valuable but unreliable. So what's maturity? Well, maturity is knowing what's right, knowing how I should be living. And when my emotions push against it, I'm able to do it anyway. So when the right thing is uncomfortable, when it's difficult, when I don't want to, when it's not cool, I can do it anyway. I would argue that's echoed all through Scripture.
Yeah, and that sounds like maturity to me. That's what I want for my kids.
That's maturity. Right? So then the question is, parents say to me all the time, I love this question. They say, what's your favorite Scripture about parenting? As if I have a secret one.
Yeah. The one nobody's found before.
The one no one's found yet. And it's like they want to put it on their fridge, and every time their kid walks out of the house, they want to smear their head against it. So it's, emblazoned on their forehead every time they look in the mirror. And I tell parents, I say, we have wonderful passages all through Scripture about parenting, whether it's Proverbs or Deuteronomy. I say, but the process of parenting, I would argue, is the beginning of the book of James. And I'll paraphrase it. Consider pure joy whenever we face trials, develops perseverance. What's perseverance? Well, the ability to stick with something when it's uncomfortable or tough. A little bit later, it says, perseverance must finish its work. So wait a minute. Me not fleeing the struggle, me staying in something and working through it is working on me. Perseverance must finish its work so that we are, depending on translation, mature.
Yeah.
So I'll spin that around, and I think it connects both how you all look at this with worldview and then how I look at it with the reordering of emotions. Healthy struggle is the engine to growth and maturity. Yeah, and it encompasses all of that.
That's so good. And it has such application for parents in relationship with the school.
Absolutely.
My wife is a 5th grade teacher, so I got lots of stories about, just recently a child got a couple wrong on a math review sheet.
Yeah.
And this is an exceptional student. She does well. She really gets it. And right away, the parent was like, do we need tutoring? What can we do? How can we help stop this? And it was as if the message was getting a couple wrong, suffering in that way is actually negative. And that just flies in the face of what you're talking about.
Yeah. Versus, hey, great. What can we learn from this?
Yeah.
How can you grow from this?
Yeah.
How can you develop excellence from this? Yeah. It's a very different mindset. I tell parents all the time, don't pay attention to grades.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Keep telling them.
At all. And you want your kids to struggle with some school because that's the point of learning. If everything was easy, they're not learning anything. It's the same problem I deal with churches all over the country. And one of the pressures on pastors is that everybody leave the sermon feeling good. And if we reflect on Scripture, I don't think anybody ever walked away from Christ without something they're struggling with.
Yeah,
because
yeah.
if we're broken, truth should be uncomfortable at times.
Yeah.
Also, it should also engender hope.
Yeah.
But so it's this idea that the struggle is the engine of that growth, and the struggle doesn't always have to be bad. When I talk to students, one of the things we talk about is the fact that when their head registers something as uncomfortable, it immediately interprets it as bad.
Yeah. It's just like automatic.
Yet and they all agree. And then I say, okay, how many athletes do we have in the crowd? And half the room raises their hand. I say, great. So do you all think practice is bad or makes you a better athlete? And they're like, oh no, it makes me a better athlete. Well, is practice always enjoyable? No. And I'm like, huh. And it's amazing because their eyes start going bing, bing.
Yeah,
and they're like,
it.
Whoa.
Yeah.
It's amazing how we can see truth in pieces, but we don't apply it to the whole of life.
Yeah. And I'd love to explore what we kind of talked about at the beginning, the idea that if you are emotionally mature, spiritually mature, you have perseverance, you have all these other things.
Yeah.
Happiness, true happiness,
Absolutely.
gets added in on top.
It does, because happiness is not really the goal. So I'll give you an example. I've had this conversation more than 100 times with teenage girls, but one sticks out in my mind. She has for a couple of years because she was just so spicy. She came in my office, she's 15, and she said, I'll call her Emily. And she said, very adamantly, can you help me feel better? And I said, I have no idea. And she went, what? That's your job.
Isn't that what you do?
And then she said, my last 3 therapists told me they could help me feel better. And I said, well, what happened? And she said, it didn't work. And the whole focus was all about feelings. And I call her by darling. I said, well, darling, I have no idea if I can help you feel better, but I bet I can help you live better. Of course, this is consistent with longstanding transcendent truth of what it means to be healthy. Yeah. I said, I bet I can help you live better. And in my experience with thousands upon thousands of folks your age, when you learn to live better, your feelings go to their proper place and don't trouble you so much.
Yeah.
And of course, she sat back. It was really funny. She sat back and looked at me kind of mad. And she went, well, I've never heard that.
Oh boy.
But it's a change.
Yeah.
And it's that notion of, in essence, we want to learn to live well in the midst of a broken world. Not how can we be happy all the time?
Right. And that goes to a biblical worldview. So this is like a little commercial for developing our worldview as parents so that we have a biblical perspective. We see, we interpret, we engage the world around us from biblical ways. So I love that. This really dovetails with the kinds of things that Maggie and I have been sharing and doing interviews for the Emmanuel families. Yeah. But we have about 8 minutes left. I would love to take a hard turn towards what does this look like? Let's say a parent has a biblical worldview of suffering and of reality. Yep. They want their children to become healthy, well-adjusted, persevering, character-filled adults. What does that look like? What are some things you can say we should concentrate on as parents today of the youngest kids from kindergarten all the way through?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I can give you 4 things, but I want to start with this. The first thing I tell parents is parenting is not about finding the new best thing and reading 14 books on it. Parenting is, and this is true as I know you all have talked about with worldview shaping, is getting back to simple, transcendent truth. Yeah. And so I tell parents all the time, first thing is relax. When we do a few of the basics really well, it totally changes the
Love that.
It's the path. And so 4 things I tell folks to really think about. Number 1 is family identity. Do you have a family identity? And the idea, the way we get there is boundary. I tell people, draw a box. And inside you put the word yes, outside you put the word no. This is where you begin shaping who you are as a family. And you need that family identity because that is what you will assimilate your children towards. It's not about learning to parent each child uniquely. It's understanding that regardless of their uniqueness, they are called to live one identity, an identity that is honoring to God. And so you claim that by your family identity. And it begins by looking at everything. What is the nature of it? What does it bring us? What do we lose? Do we say yes or no to video games? Do we say yes or no to certain ratings on movies? Do we say yes or no to sleepovers? What's wrong with a sleepover? Well, maybe 50 years ago, nothing. Today, it's often the first introduction of inappropriate sexual contact and substance use among older grammar school students. So it's a problem. What are the ground rules? What are the boundaries we put around technology? And so it forces us to assess the nature of everything. And that's a very different world than most parents are in today. I get a complaint all the time. Parents come in my office, mom and dad came in my office, and the mom led off by saying, I gave my third grader an iPhone. And I said, well, was it 3 weeks or less? And she went, how did you know? I said, well, because when you give a grammar school student an iPhone, 3 weeks or less, they're looking at inappropriate content because they type in body parts because they're third graders. That's what they do. They talk about them all the time.
Yeah.
Guess what? When they type it in, guess
they're
what
going
they
to see?
see? They are. And now they're seeing distorted beauty or distorted reality. And she was just crushed. And I said to her, well, let me just ask, why'd y'all do that? And she licked her finger and put it in the air. And I laughed and she laughed. And she said, we're in a good church. We're in a good community. Everybody else was giving their kids an iPhone. So she was parenting just by consensus. I said, I said, did you not have a grandparent that said, if all your friends jump off a cliff, would you jump off a cliff?
I remember that one.
And she started dying laughing. And she said, yes. I said, you have forgotten. You just made a simple mistake. You forgot your role as a parent. You're the gatekeeper of your child. Yeah. Nobody else is the gatekeeper for your child. And you really have to assess and begin looking at what do we say yes to, what do we say no to? That is the beginning of two things. One, shaping identity, but also you're starting to let your child struggle because you're going to say no to some things.
Right. There's some boundaries.
Yeah, there's some boundaries. So that's one category. You and I could dig in a whole lot more in that, but that's the general category to start thinking about. The second category is the idea of do less and require more of your kids. Now, if we go back 100 years, as soon as a child demonstrated a functional ability, we gave them a reason to use it. As soon as they could grab kindling, they carried it. As soon as they were stronger, they carried firewood. As soon as they could reach a sink, they did dishes. As soon as they could reach the head of a horse, they learned to walk behind it with a plow. We historically in this country, you go back typically about 3 generations, that's how we raised our kids. We met them at the place God made them functionally able. Now, that is still seen today in third world countries, just so you know.
Yeah.
Where they have the lowest levels of anxiety and depression in their kids.
Interesting.
Yes, it is. So the great thing is the age at which children develop functional ability has never changed in the history of man. It's the age of 2. That's when fine and gross motor. Now, granted, it's a few months either side. Fine and gross motor skill are coming together, 3 to 5 word sentences. It used to be we met them right there. Now we no longer do that.
No.
See, today, we have children that will go off to college with no practical life skill.
Right.
And the reason we want to do that is this. If you take a 13-year-old young man from 100 years ago, think Little House on the Prairie, 140 years ago.
I was actually picturing that show as you were talking about carrying the milk pail. And
Yeah. If you think about that 13-year-old young man was fully functional.
Right.
He helped run a farm. He helped protect. He helped build multiple
When
homes.
Dad left to go to Mankato, he was able to manage the farm and the ranch and his sisters. Yeah.
Right. And historical record, like works like Democracy in America, also acknowledges that of the average teenage male. And so we know this was the norm. So think about, and you compare that to today, we have a hard time with our children boiling water when we're not home.
Right.
So it's a drastic difference of what we give them as responsibility. And the key of this is this plays into identity formation.
Yeah.
The beginning of identity formation, I would argue, are 3 key questions. Am I valuable? Do I have meaning? As I stand here today, before I ever do anything, do I have value? The second is, am I capable? Did God build me with capability and a purpose? And then the third is, am I a member? Do I fit or belong to something larger than myself in a meaningful way? Now, ultimately, Christ answers all of those.
Yeah.
But the beginning of that is a practical building of the scaffolding so that the individual is primed as spiritual understanding comes in. So you think about the 13-year-old young man 140 years ago. Did he know he was valuable? Yeah, people relied on him.
Yeah.
Did he know he was capable? Yeah, because at the age of 2, they strapped a proverbial tool belt on him and said, we're going to cram as many in as we can.
Yeah.
And did he know he was part of a larger whole? Absolutely, because when you are onboarded with capability early, it oozes out of you to the use of others.
Yeah. So just this one thing, I mean, the practical implications, if I'm hearing you, it's, when our kids are 2 years old, we start giving them things to do, meaningful things to do.
Absolutely. And so when parents struggle with that, I say, think about this in your own home. What do you do on a regular basis for the upkeep functioning of your home and things in your home that your child cannot do unless limited by strength or development? Not tall enough, not strong enough. The answer is nothing.
Yeah.
So we have no reason not to step back and begin giving them ownership.
Yeah. And in that, like you said, that identity shaping happens. And the real specific thing is, and we know this, we just ignore it, that
Yeah.
there's nothing like the sense of accomplishing something meaningful and authentic as opposed to,
Right.
being praised for really not doing anything.
Just being told 400 times how special we are, and we're not sure why we're that special.
Right.
Well, an interesting thing is when a child can begin answering those things practically, something is meaningful. The natural desire of why is that meaningful? The itch to grow spiritually is watered at extremely young ages.
Yeah.
And it builds, people say, well, that's practical identity formation. I say, yeah, but it's like a parable told by Christ. A parable, very simply, is a practical story that you can relate to in everyday life that gives you both the framing and the tools to wrestle with spiritual understanding.
Yeah.
Well, practical identity formation gives you the practical scaffolding of understanding of those questions, so you're primed and ready as spiritual understanding comes in.
Right.
We have young adults today with no scaffolding, zero.
Yeah. Boy, that answers so many questions.
Yeah.
We're almost out of time. I would love to hear the last two. You said there were four.
The last two.
Just give us the last two.
The third is the basic learning tool of childhood is not reward and consequence. It's cause and effect. If a man doesn't work, he shouldn't eat.
Yeah.
The idea is establish routine. Yeah, right. Establish routines in your home.
Yeah.
They come home from school. You can have a snack. We don't care when you do this, but you can't do anything else till your homework's finished. And if you need to yell and scream, it's okay, but we're going to hold the gate. Right. And then when that's finished, you still can't do what you want to do until you take care of obligations around the home, because we just covered they're going to happen.
Right.
And that simple connection of ownership of responsibility before freedom and privilege is foundational in the growth of that child, because that's actually how we manage the struggle we introduce with obligation.
Okay.
We don't try to maneuver it. We don't try to force it. We hold the gate at every stage. And then the fourth category is really limiting the two key interrupters that get in the way of parenting today. The first, I would argue, is technology and how we navigate it.
Yep.
I'll give you a very simple thing to think about that'll build the appetite for parents to want to navigate this better. Pew Research looked at this, and in 2012, they said 8.4% of teenagers had clinical levels of anxiety and depression.
2012, 8.4%.
In 2022, it was 29.8%. We went from 8% to 30% in a 10-year period. So when we look at this sociologically, we can find nothing of a traumatic nature in this country that directly affected that age group as they developed. Nothing. If anything, we had more services, more treatment, more everything.
Yeah.
And what we know is the belief is right around 2012 is when we crossed the 50% usage threshold of screens constantly. Now we're at 98, 99%. As that has grown, they have become more fragile. So we cannot not address it.
Yeah.
And understanding when to introduce, what to introduce, how to introduce. There are many things that go into that we could always dig into later, but there are things we have to consider to say, when do we allow that footprint in our family? And if we ever allow it, in what way, in what shape, how big should it be?
Yeah, and I think it's so fascinating, that direct, incontrovertible connection between anxiety and screen usage.
Absolutely. It's amazing to me the number. I've taken hundreds of teenagers off of tech to help save their lives.
Yeah.
Now, many of them have gone back later in a very different way.
Yeah.
But I have story after story after story just about folks that have changed the course of their life because of that, and adults. Yeah. Fourth category, or the other piece of that fourth category, is extracurriculars. I'll give you a quick background. I coached at the high school level for 11 years. We had several state championships, a national title basketball. My son's a collegiate athlete. I work with collegiate professional athletes all over the country. And it's amazing to me the number of collegiate coaches that tell me again and again and again and again, travel athletics do not make the best athletes.
Wow.
And it's like, what? Wow. Now, they're not saying the best athletes may not end up playing travel.
Oh, correct.
But you know what I hear again and again? That travel athletes, the typical travel athlete, from the moment they can bounce a ball all the way up through, they're harder to coach, they play for the wrong reason, they do not have the best skill set. It's amazing. Right now I'm working with a bunch of, I won't tell you the sport, a certain position in a sport because there's small numbers.
Yeah.
And what I am told by scouts is they want to make sure they've played multiple sports and are well-rounded. It's the idea of Aristotle and Socrates, a generalist before a specialist. We also know that in life, when we are first generalists. God called us to all of his creation before we specialize. Then once we specialize, we're much better equipped.
Yeah.
And they want athletes that aren't training the same muscle groups and the same habits constantly, because they get injured more. They're not the best all-around athletes. They don't last as long.
Mm-hmm.
And yet parents will sell the farm for their kids to play travel sports. Now, the same happens with ballet and competitive cheer. And so what I tell parents is this: remember that family identity you established in the first step? This is who we are. Whatever you choose to do, it's okay to stretch a little as long as you're in harmony with the healthy family identity. There's no reason not to stretch a little bit here and there.
Sure.
We can decide we're going to miss a dinner here, a dinner there, whatever. But when we say we're never going to church again for the next 6 months, or we're never having family dinner again, or we're spending $10,000 for our child to play 2 seasons of a travel sport, which is probably low average, then we have a problem. So it's got to be in harmony with what we have claimed as a healthy identity. So those 4 things, just that idea of understanding we have to claim a family identity. It's what we say yes to, what we say no to, that we have to step back and begin giving ownership of life to our children.
And
so
that starts with clearing the dinner table and making the bed.
Clearing the dinner table, making the bed, putting your toys away. I mean, it's really cool. What a kid does in one direction, unless it's involuntary, like throw up or diarrhea, they can do it in reverse. They got the toys out, they can put them away.
Yeah, that's a fascinating concept.
It's just very basic. And then the third, connect cause and effect. Instead of all the power struggles, hey, you just don't move on to the next thing till this is taken care of.
Yeah.
And then the last is make sure the extracurriculars, and part of that technology and extracurriculars, the other influences, the other things your children want to pursue, that they're healthy and that they're in harmony with a healthy identity.
Yeah, that's so good. So good, Keith. Where can folks get more good words like this? Where can they connect with you?
Please, you can come to our website, livesturdy, STURDY.com.
Okay.
And we're slowly trying to develop more resources for parents on there. There's a page full of, 20 or 30 podcasts I've done. This one, once it drops, will be on there as well.
Right. Yep.
So please check it out. You can also reach out to me by email on that site.
That's great. And just really appreciate this whole concept of raising sturdy kids. It really smacks in the face of a lot of what our culture is saying is important. And it's sound and it's aligned with a biblical worldview. So thank you so much, Keith, for spending this time with us. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me.
What a fascinating conversation. Keith is a refreshing voice to Christian families. I love how he summed up our action steps for us. So here they are again. 1, establish a strong family identity. This reminds me of our episode in January where Maggie interviewed Rodney Knox about establishing a family mission statement. If you didn't catch that episode, go back and listen to it because it directly relates to this first point that Keith shared with us. 2, do less for your kids and require more of your kids. 3, use the principle of cause and effect as a basic learning tool. And I love this phrase that he used, ownership of responsibility before freedom and privilege. I mean, what a great creed for life. And finally, work hard to limit the 2 key interrupters to healthy growth in children, technology and extracurriculars. Well, Keith's website and contact information will be posted in the show notes, so you can reach out to him and connect with him. And we'll also post a short summary of these 4 application points. Next month, we'll be discussing the stages of parenting with Emmanuel's own Ryan Wood. I'm really looking forward to that conversation. Until then, remember that you and your kids have been made for more. Made for More podcast is a production of Summit Ministries Center for Biblical Worldview Formation and Emmanuel Schools. Emmanuel exists to equip students to serve God and neighbor through mind, body, and soul based on a Christ-centered foundation. Join us next month on Made for More.